Hello, 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 and welcome to My Empty Hands, a podcast about the martial arts with a focus on Kempo. As always, I am Reggie Darden, and I'm very excited to have another great guest on with me today, Mr. Tommy Burks, and we're going to talk some Kempo and talk about his journey, and we'll probably get into some teaching and whatever else tickles our fancy this evening. So I usually start things off with kind of giving my background, but since we are here for the guest and not me, I'm just gonna keep it short and sweet by saying that I have advanced ranks in both Chinese Kempo and American Kempo, and have also advanced rank in Capoeira, and then some not so advanced rank in Taekwondo and Hapkido, and did a little boxing as well while I was in the Army. As we're recording, it's Veterans Day, so nice to be able to do this and talk to great folks. So so let's get into Mr. Burks. Since I already know that you also did other, you've trained in other arts, I would say, when did the martial arts find you, and then when did Kempo find you, and how did it all start for you?
Well, I actually started in Taekwondo on June 15th, 1966. Now, two things very special happened to me that day. My son was born that afternoon, and I went out and seen my ex-wife and got to see the baby for about 20 minutes that evening. And at the time, that's about all they'd allow you to visit. And so I left there and I went out and joined a Taekwondo class at the National Guard Armory in Denton, Texas, which was taught by Mike Steen, who was Alan Steen's little brother. And Alan Steen had a big organization, Taekwondo at the time, in Dallas. So I went out and I joined the class. My first night, I got to fight 5 fights, all against brown belts. I come out of there looking like I'd been in a car wreck, because at the time, Texas had a saying called white contact, which meant 1-inch penetration to the face, 3-inch penetration to the body, and we didn't wear gear. So it was bare fist. So it was funny, I stopped at a convenience store on my way home to get something to drink, and I walked in and the guy goes, "Oh man, do I need to call you an ambulance?" And I said, "No." "Why would you think that?" And he says, "Well, what happened to you?" And I got to thinking, and he thought I'd been in a car wreck. I looked so bad. Of course, when I got home, I looked in the mirror and I could understand why he had said that. And next day I went by to see my ex-wife, and she also thought I'd been in a car wreck because I was beat up so bad. So that started my adventure into the martial arts, and I was in Taekwondo for about a period of 18 years. Had a couple of severe back problems, and one of them wound up requiring surgery, and the other took me almost a year to get over a sciatic nerve problem. But I made black belt into there, and I went through 4 different instructors. I kept losing instructors because I was in a college town. Mike Steen, when I started with him, he was going through college. He graduated and moved off. That class turned over to a gentleman named Michael Elston, who had made black belt under Mike Steen. And then he graduated and moved off. Then after my back surgery, I had to drive all the way to Dallas, and I got into a class with a gentleman named James Toney. And then after I made first brown, he decided to take 3 or 4 months off. And so it wound up a guy named Larry Castor, who was considered one of the toughest black belts in the Steen regime, opened up a school in the town that I lived in, which was Louisville. And I went down there to check on joining that school, and he asked me if I would run that school for him, which I did, and then I wound up making black belt under Mr. Castor. So Taekwondo didn't give me what I was looking for. I was more interested in self-defense because in the early 70s, I became a police officer for about 2 years. And one of the things that always concerned me on the street was, did I have enough knowledge of self-defense to handle any type of attacks that I might encounter, as a police officer? um, Luckily, I never got into anything that I couldn't handle with the knowledge I had from Taekwondo. But again, I hadn't found what I was looking for. So, I'd heard several people say over those 18 years, if you really wanted to learn karate, get with a Japanese instructor. So, I noticed one day in the paper there was a Japanese instructor teaching Okinawan karate, and he had a class there in Louisville, and I got in that class. And I'd go to the class there in Louisville, and I'd also go to Carrollton once a week and train there. And then it was funny because he told me, he said, you're a black belt in another system, says, so you have to be a white belt with me until you're ready to test for black belt. And I said, I don't care. I'm not looking for rank. I'm looking for knowledge. Well, within like 6 weeks, he invited me to start coming to his advanced class on Saturday, which was just brown belts and black belts. And one of the things I'd like to point out, within about that first 6 weeks I was with him, I'd learned a kata, and I asked him, what does this movement mean that we're doing in this kata? And he looked at me and he said, you're not at a rank level yet that I can explain that to you. And I said, okay, which I thought that was a little kind of suspicious. And when I'd gotten the Okinawan system was the first time I actually had ever started asking, why am I doing what you're showing me to do? Because in Taekwondo, they showed you something to do and you just did it. And so 17 months later, after I started, he started testing a bunch of people for black belt, and he wanted me to test also. Well, I did that test, and I was promoted straight to second black. And so I went back and I asked him about this move in this kata again. And he looked at me and he says, well, you're still not at a level yet that I can explain that to you. So I realized he didn't know, and which was pretty disappointing. And again, I really hadn't found anything in the Okinawan system that was, again, satisfying my desire for self-defense. And I'd seen Mr. Parker do a demo at Alan Steen's U.S. Champions one year. I think that was probably around 71, 72, and I was really blown away with the demo that Mr. Parker did. So I was working in Arlington for an engineering surveying firm, and I'd taught the Okinawan system at a fitness center about 2 blocks from where I worked when I was in the Okinawan system, and I'd quit once I dropped out of the Okinawan system because, again, I just hadn't found what I was looking for. And one of the engineers that I worked with came in one day and he said, hey, what's Kempo karate? And I said, well, if it's Ed Parker's Kempo karate, from what I understand, it's an extremely fantastic street self-defense system. He said, well, there's a couple of guys teaching us over there where you used to teach Okinawan karate. So I went over there and I checked this out. And I attended a class, and again, I left that class disappointed because I still wasn't seeing what I was looking for. And of course, I paid them for a month of lessons, so I thought, well, I'm going to go back and check out a second class and see, if it gets better. And when I went to that class, there was a guy showed up wearing a second black, and he came over and introduced himself to me, started talking. And for some reason or other, he just took a liking to me and asked me if he could just work with me that night. He had just moved in from Phoenix. This guy was named Jeff Dukes. And at the end of that class, he told me, he said, I don't think this class is going to work out for you. He said, why don't you let me get in touch with Mr. Parker? He said, and see if Mr. Parker will let you have your own club or school code, and you just do your own thing. He said, I think you got the talent where you could learn this on your own. And he said, and I will help you any way I can help you. Well, I said, okay, I agreed with that. He got in touch with Mr. Parker, and Mr. Parker sent me an application for the IKKA. I filled that out and sent it back to him. And in about a week and a half, I received a message back from him. It was packaged and showing that he had accepted me into the IKKA as a school, and had gave me a provisional first degree black belt that was good for 1 year. And the letter stated that within 1 year I needed to test for first black. So it also in that package included what everybody refers to the old red manual. That had all the information from yellow belt through third black in it. So I sat down without an instructor. I actually got to work out with Jeff Dukes two or three times more, and then he moved back to Phoenix. And so I just got the material, started reading it, working it out. And I'd also attend any seminars that was, there was another black belt over in Irving named Rick Fowler, who was bringing certain people in occasionally to do seminars, and I would attend their seminars. First one was by Stephen LeBounty, who was one of Mr. Parker's 7th degree black belts. And the other person coming in was Richard Plantis, who was also a 7th degree black belt. So what I really loved about Mr. Plantis' classes, he would always explain to you why you was doing what you was doing, and talk about concepts and principles of Kempo. So that was really what I was looking for. And so when I'd go to one of his seminars, he would talk about different things and principles and concepts that was involved in what you was doing. And then I'd go back home and I would go through everything that I had learned and see how those applied to everything that I was doing. Well, the provisional certificate that Mr. Parker gave me was an 8.5 by 11 size certificate. You probably seen that hanging on my wall when you came to my event earlier in the year. And it was dated May 1st, 1986. Well, exactly 1 year to the date, May 1st, 1987, I tested for first degree black belt. Now, I did this without having an instructor. When I tested, I knew everything from yellow belt all the way through first degree black belt, which included all the forms, all the sets, all the number 1 sets, and even 48 of the 96 extensions, which really kind of blew Mr. Parker away. And after that test, Mr. Parker was spending that weekend with a gentleman named Key C, who was a 6th degree in Kaji Kempo, and he was transferring over into American Kempo. And Mr. C was nice enough to invite anybody that wanted to, that was on that test, to come over to his house and try to spend some time with Mr. Parker. And of course I readily accepted that invitation and was fortunate enough to get to spend about an hour and a half talking to Mr. Parker one. And he had just finished putting together the new yellow belt manual and had a rough draft of the Orange Belt manual. So he got those out and showed them to me. And he was telling me how surprised he was on that test that I did extensions. He said, because nobody in Texas knows extensions. And he said, how'd you learn that? And I said, well, just like everything else, I read it out of the manual and worked the techniques out. Now, unfortunately, at that time, some of the info in the manuals, especially in the brown belt manuals, were absolutely horribly written. And I remember the description I had on leaping crane is you jumped off towards 9 or 9:30 and landed on your right foot in a crane stance, and then you threw a side kick to 4:30 with your right foot to the back of the guy's knee. And I'm sitting there going like, that ain't what the person is, and you jump off on your left foot instead of your right foot. So, like I say, a lot of these description of techniques, they were totally written incorrectly. And by going to seminars, very quickly, I had about 3 people asking me if they could start training under me. And here I'd only been in Kempo for my first seminar had been 6 weeks. And, so that was great because now I had students that I could actually work with and had somebody to always partner with. And so I would have students do the attack and I'd have to figure out how to put those techniques together and, what directions I was supposed to be going at and stuff like that. And luckily at the time I had a secretary that was always wanting something to do because she's one of these people that just couldn't sit there and, make busy work. She wanted to be doing something. So I'd take this stuff in her and she would retype all of it for me. So that was how I wound up spending the first year. And then, like I say, I was very fortunate. Mr. Parker came in. I had my board consisted, my testing board consisted of Mr. Parker, Mr. Mike Peck, Mr. Huck Planis, and Mr. Keith C. And then I had Mr. Parker did a seminar the day after we tested at the University of Texas. And a black belt who I came up with in Taekwondo from, we both were white belts when I started, and we came up through, and he made black belt. He had gotten over into the Kempo system and under a different instructor. And so he came to that seminar and he wanted to pair up with me when we started working techniques. And I remember after about 5 minutes of doing techniques, he stepped back and asked me, he said, what in the world are you doing to me? And I said, I'm just doing the techniques. He goes, no, you're doing something else. And I said, I don't know what you're talking about. And he informed me that he said, well, I've been trying to stop you from being able to do techniques on me. And I can't stop you from doing the techniques. And I said, well, glad you told me because I didn't know you was trying. And so he asked me, he said, could I start training with you? And I said, sure. And so he was about already 8 months into his 1-year probation period. Excuse me. And Mr. Parker had told me on Friday night when we sat down and talked, he said, how in the world did you learn all this material? And I said, well, that's what I was testing for. And he said, that's not really, he said, what I require. He said, what I require is people to show me they're getting an understanding of my system. He said, most people don't ever get out of orange belt in that 1-year period. And I told him, I said, I wasn't testing for orange belt. I was testing for first black. I said, if I didn't know the material, I wouldn't have took the belt. I said, that's just the way I look at it. And so, anyway, I started working with this buddy of mine that I trained with in Taekwondo for all those years. And, we actually got past the 1 year period, and I called Mr. Parker. And actually, this 10 months later is when I called him. And so, I said, I've got this guy, and he's passed his 1 year limit of the testing for his first black. I said, is there going to be somewhere that you're going to be coming in for a seminar that I can bring him and get him tested without us coming all the way to California? Because I didn't have the money to go to California. And he said, yeah. He said, I'm going to be in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to do a seminar on March 26th. He said, if you'll have him there the evening of the 25th, we'll do the test. And I said, okay. And he asked me, he said, do you know the requirements for second? And I said, yes, sir. He said, so you're going to test also. Okay, no problem. And so we went to Albuquerque. We showed up Friday night. And at that time, Mr. Parker generally didn't let people come in and watch a test. So I had my girlfriend with me at the time. I'd gotten a divorce. And my current girlfriend was with me. And so she had to go to the motel while we did the test. And I'd asked Mr. Parker, I said, would it be possible that I could film this test? And he said, sure. So I'd set up a camera and we filmed the test. And so then the next morning, Mr. Parker was going to do the seminar. But let me back up just a second. So after that test and after the promotion, Mr. Parker come up to me and he told me, he says, you've never had an instructor. Now you do, because now I'm your instructor. And he said, and I will always take care of you. And of course, I was just blown away with, now having him as a direct instructor. I was on cloud nine. The next day, he got ready to start the seminar, and he came up and he asked me, he said, are you going to film the seminar? And I said, well, sir, I understand you generally don't let people film seminars. And he said, generally I don't, but that's not what I asked you. He said, are you going to film the seminar? And I said, yes, sir. So I run down and got the tripod and got the camera and brought it up and set it up. And I asked BJ, who is now my current wife, and has been since then, and to film this. And she had gotten mad at me on the way to Albuquerque, and she had told me, she said, I've decided you need to make a choice. And I said, what's that? And she said, it's either me or Kempo. And I said, what? And she repeated that, and I said, well, if that's the way you feel, I really hate to see you go. And she started crying. She said, you would pick that over me? And I said, yes, I would. And she said, well, I don't understand. And I said, you can walk out the door tomorrow and be gone out of my life. And I can't, I don't have any way of stopping that. And I said, but what Kempo's given me, nobody can ever take away from me. And so she was still pretty upset over this the next morning. So when I asked her if she would film this for me, she told me no. And I kept on at her, and she finally got up there and was doing the filming for me. And what was funny, Mr. Parker got out there and he started the seminar, and he put us to work, and he turned around and went straight over to BJ and started talking to her. And here's this big, huge man walking up to her, and she's barely 5 feet tall. And she looked like a little cat or a mouse sitting there with this big cat coming after her. And she was just cringing. And so she's sitting there and, she's got a shocked look on her face. And then he comes back out and he puts us to work again on something else. And he heads right straight back to BJ and starts talking to her. And now she's got a smile on her face. And so she's over there smiling, and then she's laughing and carrying on. And so I absolutely could not wait to get home and download this video so I could hear what her and Mr. Parker was talking about. And so I get home and I start downloading this video, and none of it's on there. And every time he would come over to her, she'd put it on pause. And it crushed me that I did not get that on that video. And so, um, again, being a student of Mr. Parker was an honor that was just unbelievable. And, working with him one-on-one was so extensive. It was just, again, it was just unbelievable. He asked me one time, he said, "Do you know so-and-so technique?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Okay, explain it to me." So I spent about 12 minutes explaining it to him. Then he spent like 40 minutes explaining the first two moves of it to me. And so I'm going like, yeah, I need to be studying harder and things like this. So that's actually how I wound up getting into Kempo. And the night that he told me I was now one of his students, he told me, he said, "If you ever come to California and I'm not available with you to work with you, I want you to get with Brian Hawkins. And said, if Brian's not available, I want you to get with Barbara Hale." He said, "They're two of the best I got. And they're the two people, if I'm not available, I want you to work with." And I said, "Yes, sir." So very first time I got to go to California, which was for the internationals in '89, I went over and met with Brian Hawkins, and we drove straight through from Carrollton to Pasadena first, and I didn't have money to even get a motel room to stay in, and because the economy was horrible in Texas at the time. So I showed up to the Pasadena school, and I walked in and I met Frank Trejo for the first time and asked him if we could do a private lesson with him. And he says, "Well, no." He said, "I've got errands I got to go run." He said, "Go to West LA and see if Brian Hawkins has got time to do something with you." So it took us 23 and a half hours to get to Pasadena. So we turned around and drive another hour and 15, 20 minutes to get to LA. And I caught Brian Hawkins locking the door, leaving the studio when we pulled up to the curb. And I talked to him, and he says, "I got some stuff I got to go do." He said, "Come back tonight at 7 o'clock. I've got an advanced class." And so we drove down to Orange County, where we had a reservation to stay, which took us a couple of hours to get there or more. And I realized if we turned around and just went straight back to Brian Hawkins' school, we was going to be lucky to get there to make his 7 o'clock class. So we just, unloaded our stuff, turned around, and headed back, and got back there about 6:45. So that was my first trip to California, and the first time I got to meet Brian Hawkins. And again, I was glad Mr. Parker actually pointed those two people out to me to work with, if I was in California and he wasn't available. Because, again, both of them very talented people and always willing to work with me on anything that I wanted to work with, or for them to look at, etc., to see if I was doing it correctly.
Gotcha. Very, very, very nice. I wanted to go back a little bit again to that first year. So with today's technology, we have a YouTube, and we can be on FaceTime and all these different things, and we can connect with each other all over the world. When we have questions on things like that, we have a lot of resources now to be able to reach out. So when in that first year, as you're going through the manual, when you how did you handle questions on different things? Were there people that you could call? Obviously there was no internet, so were there people that you could call, or how did you work out those questions on the material as you were going through it?
Well, like I say, I would. I had the red manual. Uh, if there was something in there that I had a question on, I really didn't have anybody I could pick up the phone and call. Uh, there were several people teaching around the Dallas Fort Worth area, but I necessarily didn't really want to train with them because I didn't see, the thing about meeting Jeff Dukes. Uh, he was an awesome practitioner, and uh, seeing the quality of Kempo he did compared to other people that I'd seen, they didn't compare, in my opinion. He was doing what I wanted to do. Other people was either very mechanical or very static, uh, more like Japanese type motion and stuff like this. That really wasn't what I was looking for. I was looking to move more like what Jeff did. So, and like I say, Jeff had left and went back to Phoenix, and I didn't really have a way to contact him. Because this is before cell phones and stuff like this, and so I didn't have a phone number I could call him. At the time, I wasn't under Mr. Parker per se. If there was probably a couple times there that I probably called Mr. Parker, or I wrote him letters occasionally, asking about certain things and talking about certain things. And but basically, if I had a question I needed answered, a lot of times I would ask that question when I went to a seminar and see what kind of answer I got from Mr. Planis or someone like that was doing. I don't think I attended anybody's seminars other than that one by Mr. LeBounty, and then the probably 4 or 5 that Mr. Planis come in and did.
Okay. And then also, during that first year, you said that you kind of mentioned that you kind of picked up a few students. I mean, were you kind of really running a school in that first year, or like kind of who did you have people to kind of work the material on, or?
Well, I had a training area at my house. I had a bedroom that was converted from a garage, and it was about a 1.5 car garage, and I turned that into a training area. Then later, I also had a detached garage, which was a 2.5 car garage, and I turned that into a training area. I didn't have a regular school. I've never really had a regular commercial school. Never had the desire to have that. Never really had the desire to train lots and lots of students. I always preferred to have smaller classes because I like to spend time with my students instead of trying to have a class of 30, 40 people that you don't get a chance to spend one-on-one time with if you need to. I'd rather have a small class, and I've always done that. And you've been to my training facility. Again, when I tell people I teach in a barn, they get a funny look on their face. But because like I say, I've got 2,000. When we built our barn, I designated 2,000 square feet of that as a training area. And like I say, I think it's probably about as nice as any commercial school that you will find. So, but most of the other training areas I had, well, when we had our ranch before we bought this ranch, I built a freestanding 1,200 square foot building, and that was my training area. And then later on, I turned that into a bunkhouse because I was also doing horse training clinics. Then I built a training area back in my barn. It was air conditioned, heated, matted, and everything else. And then when I came back over here, I built a bigger training area. So, um, you know, and luckily, I went over I paid a guy named David Sinaceris, who was a fifth degree under Mr. Tom Kelly. He was teaching a class over in Dallas, and one of the classes I did where I worked with Jeff Duke, he had called me and told me, he said, "Hey," he said, "I found out this guy named David Sinaceris is teaching a class over in Dallas. Said I'm going to go over there and one of his classes. You want to go?" And I said, "Sure." So we went over there, and David actually taught at a fitness center inside of a racquetball court. And we went over that night. We worked on two-man set. And so I asked David, I said, "Could I pay you a mat fee and come over to some of your classes when I can?" And he said, "Sure." And so I went over two or three of his classes. And then, like I say, the economy in Texas was horrible. And he left and went to Boston because, he couldn't find any work around this area. So he left and went to Boston. So I only got to do two or three classes with him. And he also, what was kind of neat, he had a DVD that he had done where he actually ran through all the techniques and did the forms. I can't remember if he did the sets on there or not. And he asked me, he said, "Do you want to buy one of my DVDs?" And I said, "Sure." So it was a reference. And so that answered a lot of questions that I had on certain techniques, seeing him actually do the technique and going back and looking at the description of it. And it kind of filled in some gaps and holes that I was looking for. So that, that was a help. One of the other things that I did to prepare to be able to test in a year, I drove an hour and a half each way back and forth to work. So I would record cassette tapes because, my truck had a cassette player in it. I would record the name of the techniques on a cassette disc or a tape, plug it in, and as I'm driving, listen to the names come out, and I'd run through the techniques in my mind. And so the first time I did this, I set up a clock where I could watch the second hand go around, and I was calling out techniques like every 5 seconds. Well, within like 2 days, I'm sitting there going like, "Oh man, I got to redo this." So I redid it, and then I started calling out techniques every 3 seconds, and I scrambled them up. I didn't put them in any kind of order. I just have sheets of all the different belt level techniques laying in front of me, and I would pick those names off and scramble them up because I didn't want to hear them in order. I wanted to just hear them randomly. And so I think the last time I recorded those, I was calling off a name like every 2 seconds. And then it's a wonder I didn't wind up having a car accident. And so then I'd also use this in class. I'd plug that tape in, and well, there I had to go back, and by then I had a couple of the orange belts that trained under David Sinaceris. When he left town and left, they called me wanting to be students. So like I say, I picked up 2 excellent students that had fairly decent basics and as orange belts. And so I went back and I'd record the tape to what kind of belt levels I had in class. We'd run through the yellow belt techniques, and then we'd run through the orange belt techniques, we'd run through the purple belt techniques, and if I had people above that, I would add those. But again, I wouldn't put those techniques in order. I'd always scramble those techniques. And when I got the red manual in '86, in '87, Mr. Parker actually deleted a couple, 2 or 3 techniques, and he deleted a couple and he changed a couple to something else. We, what we do now for alternating maces, he he did a technique that you executed called aggressive twins, that you did the block and you executed two kicks. Well, he decided that that was probably a little bit too advanced for white belts, so he changed that to alternating maces. Then he took a technique called spreading branch and he deleted it and put in captured twigs. And because, and I still do, spreading branch. To me, it was too good of a technique to take out of the system, but it was too complex for most white belts. Now, I still teach it to white belts. He also took a technique out called intellectual departure and changed it to deflecting hammer. And the reason he took it out, intellectual departure works on the inside of a kick, and he felt like at white belt level, he didn't want the white belt working on the inside of a kick because, again, you're still open to both the attacker's right and left hands. So he went to deflecting hammer, which now you work on the outside of that kick, and all you got to worry about basically is the attacker's right hand. So, he changed up some things, deleted a couple of techniques. But the one thing I love about spreading branch, you can take spreading branch and add it on to about 70% of the techniques, at least in the system, as an extension. And it works fantastic. But most, so many people, the newer people that's got into Kempo, since those were deleted, most of them have never seen them. So instead of 10 techniques for yellow belt, I teach 12, because I still teach intellectual departure and I teach spreading branch. Now, it's kind of funny because, and I didn't find out this later, Mr. Parker had just came out with the yellow belt material, because originally the Kempo material started at orange belt. And when the 1620 techniques was developed, they go, wow, Mr. Parker left, he made a mistake. He left a club technique out of orange belt. Orange belt doesn't have a club technique in it, because Mr. Parker at the time looked at it and said orange belts don't have the skill level to deal with the club attack yet. But when he put together yellow belt, there was a club technique in it. And so, asking, why did you do this? Yellow belt is a variety of techniques to kind of be to show students a variety of techniques that's going to be involved in Kempo. And so, a lot of people say, well, we need a kind of an introductory program. Mr. Parker put yellow belt out there to basically be that. And a lot of people don't really understand and know that. So.
Yeah, it's always been curious to me about those techniques that were removed. I've many have said, these techniques were too complicated for white belt, and I can understand that. But it's always been curious to me that those techniques weren't just moved to later in the system as opposed to being removed. There are some, like you, there are some teachers that still teach those. But yeah, it was always curious to me that they just weren't moved to a different belt versus taking them out completely. So,
well, I can understand on spreading branch, because originally in spreading branch, the guy come up and grabbed you in a rear bear hug. You pinned his hand, stepped back, and buckled the inside of his left hand or his left leg as you hit him in the groin with a hammer fist. Then you come up and hit him in the face with your right upper back knuckle and grabbed his head. And what the original technique had you do is stepping forward with a knee kick to his face. as you pulled him forward. That was the first problem with that technique. When you pulled him forward and did that knee strike, you planted that right foot forward, and when you did, you circled your right hand underneath and come over with a right inward overhead elbow strike to the side of his face or the back of his head. I don't remember exactly for sure how the original technique worked. The problem with that, when I teach a technique, one of my criteria of teaching the technique, it'll work for the person if the person is 6'4", 240 pounds doing it. It'll work for a person that's 5 foot tall and weighs 90 pounds doing it. You know, if you had a 90-pound, say, female, or it could be a guy, do this on a 240-pound guy, he's not going to grab him and pull him forward and plant that right foot forward. That was the number one problem. Second problem was if you're circling that hand back beside, parallel to his body, you know, what I've seen time after time after time, people would get their arm trapped between his left arm and their body, and they couldn't do the overhead elbow strike. Okay, so fix the technique. You know, there's so many people that I hear say this, and people I've argued with and just laugh when I did it, will tell you have to do the technique exactly word for word the way it's written. The night I tested for second black, after that test was over and promotion and everything was over, I told Mr. Parker, I said, Mr. Parker, I cannot bring myself to do thrusting lance the way it's written. And I figured what he was going to do is show me how he does the technique. He didn't do that. Instead, he looked at me and he says, can you change it and make that technique work? He asked me, he said, by taking the equation formula, can you change that and make that technique work where it feels good to you? And I said, yes, sir. He said, so what's the problem? And I said, well, I don't guess there is one. And what he told me is, he said, you have to remember, Kempo is built on logic. He said, so if it ain't logical to you, fix it. And I never hesitated about, changing something in a technique to me that made it work better. Another thing Mr. Parker would also say, when he would be working on techniques and stuff, he'd say, okay, now make this yours. Make this technique yours. So years later, and I kind of felt like I understood what he was saying. Years later, I'm thinking about this, and I'm going like, well, maybe my interpretation of what he was saying about doing that wasn't completely correct or something. So I asked several other people who I knew were direct students under Mr. Parker what they felt he meant by that. And their answers was what I originally thought. Well, tailor this to the way you move, your size, etc. Now, I think that's part of it, but I don't think that's the whole picture. To me, what Mr. Parker did, in my personal opinion, and how he worked with me, the technique he gave you, the ideal phase technique he gave you, is a small puzzle. Now, most of the pieces are there, but there's pieces missing out of that puzzle. Now, by reading the Infinite Insights, Mr. Parker's other books and stuff, is the way I come up with this solution. I think there's pieces missing that Mr. Parker wanted us to fill in and complete that puzzle. I never had Mr. Parker come up and tell me, you're doing that technique wrong. You need to change it to this. Now, numerous times in seminars, he would walk up and he'd ask me, explain to me why you did that technique like you do. Because I don't necessarily do techniques like other people. And again, and for what he told me on that night when I earned my second degree has a lot to do with this, because he said if it's not logical, fix it. And and like I say, and during numerous times during seminars, Mr. Parker would come up and say, "Explain to me why you just did that technique the way you did it." And I explained it to him, and he'd go, "Okay," and grin, walk off. Now, about a year ago, I heard Mr. Brian Hawkins, make a remark on a deal he did on Facebook about a gentleman named Howard Silva, who, again, was an extremely good friend of mine and just loved him to death. And Howard was actually, I think he said 59 years old when he started Kempo. He started Kempo because his son wanted to take Kempo lessons and wanted his dad to go with him, so Howard went with him. I think his son lasted about 6 months and quit, and Howard did it for the rest of his life. And but Brian said when Howard Silva became a personal student of Mr. Parker's, they went over to together one day to Mr. Parker's house and was doing a private lesson with him. And he said Howard asked Mr. Parker, if you hadn't named your art Kempo, what would been probably your second choice for a name for it? And he said Mr. Parker looked at him and he said logic. And that put a big grin on my face, thinking about what Mr. Parker told me the night that I earned my second degree black belt. But again, and Howard was one of the people that used to always argue with me. You're not doing that technique, written, but way it's written word for word. No, I'm not, Howard, and I ain't going to. And so again, in a lot of ways, I figure a lot of people kind of feel like I've kind of been a rebel in what I do in Kempo, especially in techniques. I listened to your podcast with Mr. Speakman, and I've known Jeff for almost ever since I've been in Kempo. We're very good friends. Been on the mat with him and done a lot of techniques with him and stuff like that. I totally agree with what he said. It's like I told Mr. Parker the night I made First Black when he said, how did you learn all that material? Because that was the requirements for First Black. Even in I don't know, he may have somebody may have even told me that all I had to do was basically show that I was getting, excuse me, got allergy season and I get an allergy shot tomorrow.
No problem.
Even if somebody had told me all you need to do is get through orange belt, I wouldn't have done that. Because again, that wasn't the curriculum for me to wear a first degree black belt. And that's the way I still look at it. I make my students earn their belts. I don't care what rank it is. And again, what they have to go by to do that is Mr. Parker's curriculum for that belt level. Now, I do the 24 technique system because that's what I came up under and that's what I prefer to stay under. And, and I understand the reason a lot of people like the 1620. But again, that's really, to me, designed more for a commercial school, and I am not a commercial school. And, I see a lot of things that I do that a lot of other people don't do when they teach. But it's things that Mr. Parker expressed to me that he wanted me working on. So to me, it was important that I do that. It's important that I pass that on to my students.
Yeah, that's one of the things that's great about Kempo is that, you can tailor it, and it's supposed to be tailored for the individual, and we're not just all carbon copies of our teacher. That we get the material, we get that foundation, that blueprint, and then and then we help shape that to, we use that to shape it to our learning style, our body, our experiences. All of that is supposed to be, or at least in my view, yeah, it's all supposed to be molded to the individual, and not just not just a carbon copy of
Nope.
of the teacher. So yeah, we're supposed to take the techniques and work with them and mold them and shape them to what's most effective for us, and not just do it the cookie cutter way. So
Nope. I agree.
yeah, Kempo really shines and excels in that light. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that. So yeah, there's so many other things that we want to get to. So we'll definitely have to do part 2 and 3 and 4 and but we'll go ahead and hit our my famous 4 questions, the lightning round. I'm still working on the format for this, but yeah, I got a few questions for you as we head towards our close. First one being, do you have a favorite technique?
No, not really. It's I guess one of my favorite techniques would actually be snapping twig, the extension. And, and to me, a lot of people say they don't do the extensions. To me, I do. I teach the extensions. Mr. Parker was impressed that I could do the extensions on my first black test. So that tells me something. To me, what I see a lot of people do that say they're doing extensions, in my personal opinion, that don't qualify to be an extension. Now, and what I mean by that, if I do snapping twig on somebody, the extension, when I start at point A and when I finish that extension, I'm probably going to be 12 feet from where I started. I see so many people standing in one spot looking like a little, I don't know if you know what a little whirly bird that people stick in their yard is or not, but the little wings going round and round. They look like a little whirly bird in about a 90-mile-an-hour wind, seeing how fast they can do stuff. And for instance, when I was in Ireland in 2013 teaching, there was an instructor that did this one technique, and his second-degree black belt turned around as I was sitting there. This is right before I had to have ankle replaced, and my ankle was about 3 times the size it's supposed to be. So I was sitting there watching his class, and he did this technique, and this second-degree black belt turned around and looked at me, and he said, "Wasn't that fantastic?" And I said, "What?" He said, "That machine gun technique." And I said, "Well, let's think about it." I said, "How many times did he hit him?" "Oh, he hit him 11 or 12 times. I said, "Really? How many times did he move him?" Once. I said, "When was that?" The last time. And I said, last time he hit him? And I said, "What did he do when that last time he hit him?" He slowed down. And I said, "No, I wasn't impressed with it." Because again, he's sitting there not hitting targets. One of the things I require myself and my students, they be target specific, and my students and myself, we will hit you. Now, I make my students learn how to control strike. So they are going to hit you all. And you may have paired off with some of my guys when you were here. And
yeah, I got a few shots.
You can probably verify they'll hit you. And again, they expect to be hit back. So if I'm hitting you with techniques, you're not going to be standing in the same spot unless I hit like a marshmallow hitting you. So if you stand there in one spot and you're missing targets, what are you doing? You're teaching yourself to miss a target. You're teaching yourself, and again, I watch people on Facebook all the time. They don't know how to combine power factors. Mr. Parker designed 3 different ways for power factors, which is marriage of gravity, backup mass, and rotational torque. And they're sitting there hitting somebody with 1 power factor. I don't ever hit anybody unless I use a minimum of 2 power factors. If you divide 100% by 3, because there's 3 power factors, that's 33 and 1/3%. If I'm hitting you with 1 power factor, I'm hitting you with 1/3 of how hard you can be hit. Mr. Parker said when you do that, you're cheating that person. You're not hitting him with how hard you can hit him. So, again, I see these people standing there and they're missing targets, sometimes up to 12 inches. And some of these people are wearing some high-ranking black belts. That's ridiculous. If you're doing that, you couldn't be a brown belt under me. Probably couldn't be a purple belt or a blue belt under me. And again, they're seeing how fast they can go, which violates Kempo principle after Kempo principle. One of the things we use is barred force. So if I'm throwing stuff as fast as I can throw it, I have no timing to set targets up and have targets come to me, etc. So hope that answered your question.
It sure did. Yeah. No, I like it.
Like I say, if I do snapping twig, where we start is not where you're going to be at. Now, to be able to do that, we have to do 2 things Mr. Parker also says to do: contact manipulation and control manipulation. Again, I see very few people ever do contact manipulation. It's like you take delayed sword. They'll come in there and do an inward block and knock that arm off to the right. Where's that guy's left shoulder go when you do that? It comes forward. So I just triggered him to punch me in the face with his left hand. If I'm using contact manipulation, that arm is going to go down to keep his shoulder from coming forward. It's also setting up my next target. Control manipulation, I don't think 3% of the people out there have an understanding what that means. And again, what's sad is Mr. Parker didn't talk about control manipulation happening inside the techniques when they were written. But now he refers to it in the encyclopedia a little bit. He describes a little bit in the Infinite Insights. But again, that needed to be expanded on. When I did the final manuals that Mr. Parker put together, Mr. Parker worked on those manuals all the way into December of 1990. I got his computer files on that. In Third Black, which, before we didn't have a lot of information in Third Black. Third Black, his last manual describes a lot about control manipulation. A lot of people think if I grab or if I trap and I grab your wrist, that's control manipulation. No, it's not. That is control. And control manipulation, Mr. Parker talks about twisting, breaking, dislocating, hyperextending, all kinds of things like that while you're doing techniques. Now, can that happen while you're also doing contact manipulation? Sure. I can do contact manipulation, it turns into control manipulation. I can do control manipulation that you come back and while you're doing, simultaneously doing contact manipulation. It turns into a whole different technique when you do that. Now, if I'm going to move you 12 feet, I have to keep you from being able to counter anything that I'm doing while I'm doing that extension. So if you're not doing some kind of control manipulation and contact manipulation, that ain't going to happen. Sooner or later, that guy's going to have a space in there that he can counter what you're doing. Mr. Parker, when I earned my 2nd degree black belt, he told me, he says, I got homework I want you to do when you go home. He said, you're already doing it, but I want you to take it further. And he said, that's controlling height, width, and depth. And again, I watch people all the time on Facebook, and they're not controlling height, width, and depth. Because, again, and we use control manipulation actually to do a lot of that. So, again, it's all depending on how you do what you want to call an extension. If you want to sit there and swing 1,000 miles an hour in the air not hitting anything, you're not doing an extension. because you have no results from impact of an opponent getting hit.
Gotcha. Yeah, I like it. Right. So our next question: do you have a favorite form and/or set?
My favorite form in the Parker uh, forms would be Form 7. And my favorite form that I love to do is the Form 8 that I created. Took me 2 years to create it. Took me 94 pages to explain it. So it's very comprehensive form. And the reason I created Form 8, because it was on the curriculum. And June 17th, 1990, I got to spend 4.5 hours one-on-one talking to Mr. Parker. And I asked him, I said, is there a Form 8, which was originally Form 7? And he said, yes, there is, but I no longer teach it. And he said, the reason I no longer teach it, it does not meet the standards of my current curriculum, and I haven't had time to revise it. So what I did is, since it was a requirement on the curriculum, I created a Form 8 using Mr. Parker's written material, which everybody told me didn't exist. But having being a senior advisor for the IKKA, I was given permission to look at all of Mr. Parker's computer files. And I found two descriptions. One said Form 7, the other said Form 8, old Form 7. The only difference in the way they was done was the one that said Form 8, old Form 7, all the techniques had been given technique names to. But what was missing in that information is showing you what the attack was. Mr. Parker described what you was doing in the techniques, but he didn't tell you what you was doing it to. Now, to him, that was kind of a shorthand deal where he knew where all that was. So I used the floor pattern Mr. Parker used, but I upgraded what was listed for the techniques. So, and I asked Mr. Parker, I said, understand that you taught that to just a handful of people. And he said, that's correct. And I said, I also understand that Larry Tatum was one of those. He said, that is also correct. And Larry Tatum did a video on Form 8. And I looked at that, and again, I kind of used it a little bit as a guide in certain instances to what I created, but it's nowhere close to same form. So, but a lot of people say Form 7 is not they'll claim that Form 7 is not a legitimate form. Why? Mr. Parker was teaching that to numerous people before he passed away. Now, why are people saying it's not a legitimate form? Why? Because they weren't there when he put it together? That's ridiculous. And again, the way I see most people, one of the things I talked to Mr. Parker about was sticks and knives. And the one thing that Mr. Parker informed me was, he said it really upset him when he would see people pick up Kempo sticks or pick up knives and start doing what other systems do. He said there's lots of good, for instance, he said there's lots of good knife systems out there. He said, but that's not how we move in Kempo. So the Form 8 that I developed and the way I do Form 7, I don't do it like the other arts out there that do sticks or knives. Everything that I developed in Form 8 is developed strictly with Kempo principles and concepts and how we move in Kempo. So I've never done Filipino arts or Indonesian arts or anything else. So the only thing I do is Kempo. So my Form 7 looks different than what I see other people doing Form 7. And I'm not saying mine's right and theirs is wrong. I'm not saying that. But again, I go back to what Mr. Parker told me that he wanted to see, and that's what I work on.
Yeah, no, just going back to, as I said before, it's about making it your own and setting it up that works best for you. So yeah, I'm all for that. So that's good. So the next question, and I think I know the answer to this. One from what you've said, and then also since I've been to your to one of your seminars. But what do you have a favorite weapon?
Yeah, since actually before I developed or created my own Form 8, I created a Kempo knife system, which has a basic, beginner, intermediate, and advanced level. So the knife, to me, is my favorite weapon. And but again, I do things different with the knife than what other people do. And like I say, everything that is in my curriculum is Kempo only based. And I seen a deal one time where somebody said to never manipulate a knife from what Mr. Parker called long hilt grip, which the blade's extended out in front, to short hilt grip, where the blade of the knife's back towards your arm. And so when I developed my knife curriculum, I also developed my own Kempo knife. And one of the things is I wanted a specific knife built just for my knife curriculum and us doing Form 8, etc. So one of the things that people say, well, if you try to manipulate that knife by twirling it, you've got a big possibility of dropping it. And you do most knives. Now, that's the reason the grips on the knife that I created is totally different. It's got a small groove down the middle of each side on each grip, where your thumb and your forefinger, when you twirl that knife, your finger and your thumb slide down that groove, and they actually wind up getting down towards the butt, and they go into what we call a pivot hole, so you can pivot that knife around. It's I can't remember the last time I dropped a knife on the floor. Now, I got osteoarthritis and rheumatoid arthritis, so my joints don't work real well. But again, if you've got a knife if you got a grip on it that's kind of oval, you're going to sling that out of your hand trying to turn it around. Now, the reason I did this, because let me show this with two pens. When Mr. Tatum came up here, there's certain techniques where you're using the knife in, say, long hilt grip. You're using both knives in short hilt grip. There's times that you're doing a technique and one knife's in short hilt grip and one knife's in long hilt grip. So, say for instance, he's sitting here and he's got both knives in, or say he's got one in long hilt grip and short hilt grip, and he's got to do a technique on both sides. What he does is stop, brings these two knives together and turns them around in his hand, separates them, and starts again. Well, you just created dead space. You created breaking your continuity and everything else. So if I'm from right here and I need to switch, and I can switch those in my hand from here, I don't even slow down. It just keeps moving. And so again, the one thing that Mr. Parker tells us to do in techniques is eliminate dead space. So why do I want to create dead space and while I'm doing a technique, from there?
Exactly. Yeah. No, that's once again, I guess we had a theme. It's about customizing and tailoring it to the individual. So yeah, that's right on the money there.
Mr. Parker told us, just like Mr. Figman pointed out, Mr. Parker didn't want the system just to stop when he passed away. Mr. Parker used to say, and it's in his books, Kempo perpetually evolves. So, Mr. Parker, I was on uh, conference call one time with Darlene Parker, Mr. Parker's oldest daughter, and several advisors for Cam 4, and uh, who owns IKKA. And she asked the question, why did my dad wait so long to take a 10th? One person on that phone call, wasn't me, knew the answer to that, and said that Mr. Parker said that he would not take a 10th till he felt like he had created his art and released it to people. So he did not take a 10th till he actually finished putting together the infinite insights before he would take a 10th. And this person actually sat there and said in front of a bunch of people, that's the reason I can never be a 10th, because I've never created anything. All I've ever done is teach another man's art. So my question is, all these people that's moved to 10th, what did they create to take and help Kempo grow to a higher level? They they moved themselves up on a level with Mr. Parker. So what did they do to do this? And that's just my opinion. But I'll stand by that opinion. So, I've heard people say there's over 200. I've heard people say there's over 400 people now wearing 10th degree black belts. I say that's garbage. You're not going to see any other karate system out there doing that. They got more respect for their art. And there wouldn't be people doing that if Mr. Parker was alive right now either.
Yeah, there's a lot of varying ideas of how things should be, or where they should be, or people's status. So yeah, that's something that will be discussed for a long time, I'm sure. But we'll just keep on doing what we do, and let people.
Only thing that we can do is do what we feel's right, and pass that on to our students.
Exactly. All right. Our final question for this evening: if there was anyone that you could train with, living or dead, fictional or non-fictional, besides Ed Parker, who would that be?
That's hard to say. One of the people, because I get to train with the people that I want to train with right now. I make my black belts into innovative black belts, and probably training with Mr. Graves, who you met this year also. I enjoy more than virtually anybody I've ever been on the mat with, because I look at two things. I want to train with somebody that brings my level of expertise up to a higher level, and Mr. Graves does that, and he's developed that over about the last, I'd say, 8 years. He went from being a person who's not only extremely talented and skillful, but to a person who is also extremely knowledgeable and innovative. And he's turning that into being a also creator. To me, I look at people in our system as a creator, an innovator, or a practitioner. And if you're an innovator, you should be taking these techniques and being able to explain these forms, sets, and stuff like that to a higher level than just learning the motion and showing that motion. I know I taught a black belt class in Texas probably 10 years ago, and I said, okay, we're going to work on Form 1. And I said, okay, now do the first move of Form 1. and everybody stepped out of a horse stance back in and did into a neutral bow and did an inward block. And I said, now name me 12 things that you can explain to a student that they learn in that first move. And everybody's going like, what? Yeah. 12 things. And I said, well, I've got 17 or 18 written down. So you should be able to at least come up with 2/3 of that. And they couldn't do it. So again, we get too complacent about, well, I just need to learn the move and be able to show somebody that move. No, Mr. Parker said he didn't want you to be a mechanic of motion. He wanted you to be an engineer of motion. If it's all you can do is sit there and do the motion without understanding why. And I actually had a high ranking black belt tell me over in Ireland that I needed to change the way that I teach. He said people don't want to understand why they're doing what they're doing. He said they just want to sweat. And I remarked to him, if they just want to sweat, they need to go get an aerobics class instead of mine. Because I teach the way as close to how Mr. Parker taught that I can. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it does. Yeah, no, I definitely am for the learning the why instead of just the how. If you don't know why you're doing something, then what's the point of doing it? So
yes, exactly.
And you can get your sweat learning the why as well. So
yes, you can.
So I like that. I like that. All right, so our final thing here is now is your time for shameless self promotion. So you can plug anything you want or say anything that maybe we haven't covered tonight. You have the floor, and put anything out there that you want, and we'll close up for tonight after that.
Well, I don't really think I want to try to self promote myself. The only thing that I look to accomplish in Kempo is to, I want to, if a student of mine gets into it in the street, I want them to have had the best teachings I can teach to prepare them to get involved on the street. Again, I was in law enforcement for 6.5 years. And the last 4.5 years, I say that the first 2 years, I always wondered if I could handle anything that come up. The last 4.5 years, knowing Kempo, I never even thought that. I was never worried about is something going to happen that I can't be able to control. And so again. To me, it's like when I was in the Okinawan system. The instructor was teaching 1-point kills, 1-strike kills. And I said, that ain't going to happen on the street. I said, it would be rare that happens on the street. And his whole deal was, even when you was sparring and stuff, the first person that scored on somebody won the fight. And I said, you're giving these people a false sense of security. No, that's the way it happens. And I said, how many street fights have you ever been in your life? None. He said, how many you been in? I said, no, I don't know. Probably 15 or 20. And I said, most of them didn't end by me hitting or kicking somebody one time. A few times they did. And over a period of about 6 months, he had 4 brown belts, 2 black belts, all get into altercations. Every one of them got their butt whipped. Every one of them got the first strike in. They blocked the guy's first attack and hit him with that shot that was going to end that fight, and it didn't happen. So what happened when they hit that guy and the guy didn't go down? Where did their whole mindset go? They say, my God, I hit him with my best shot and I didn't hurt him. You think they're going to say, okay, I need to hit him with three or four more? That's the point I get it, that I like to explain about extensions. Certain people say, you'd never have an opportunity to hit somebody that many times. Well, and I recently put something, those people saying that definitely have never worked in law enforcement. Because if you've ever had to handle somebody on the street that's on a drug like PCP, which tells you that you have unlimited strength, etc., or they've dealt with people who are mentally off. One of the guys I arrested before I got off the sheriff's office was 6'3" and a half, 317 pounds, and when you looked in his eyes, nobody was home. And I asked him if he had ever been handled by mental retardation, and he goes, "Oh yeah, lots of times." And I said, "For what?" And he says, "I'm bipolar, schizophrenic, and I'm psychotic, and I'm off my medicine." Now, that guy was extremely dangerous. So, in a situation like that, 4 or 5 extensions might not be enough to put him down and put him out. When I was on police officer in the early 70s, I was in a drug class, and there was 2 officers in there, and one of the officers from Fort Worth was probably 6'5" and weighed close to 300 pounds, and that guy didn't look like he had an ounce of fat on him. The third day he came in and he was wearing a cast on his right arm from his shoulder all the way down to his hand. And the instructor asked him, "So what happened to you?" And he said, "I had an 11-year-old kid break my arm last night." And he goes, "What?" And then this was back when the big mailboxes at the post office, they used to have them on street corners. Well, these 2 officers, they'd have to go to work 4 hours after they got out of this class each day. And they was on duty, and they heard a call for help. So they went over to assist 2 other officers, and this 11-year-old kid was sitting on one of these mailboxes on the corner. And this officer walked up and was just going to grab him and pull him off this mailbox. And when he reached out to grab him, this kid grabbed his arm and snapped it like a toothpick. Kid was on PCP. So again, we hope that we never have to use this. We hope if we do, we don't have to do that much. Out of 4.5 years on the sheriff's office, I had to put my hands on 2 prisoners to arrest them. Because generally, I would walk up there with a attitude that was extremely friendly, and and I've had a lot of people cuss me out as soon as I walked up, and I tell them, we can either do it the way you're acting, or we can do it the way I'm acting. You make the decision which way you want that to be. And 99.5% of the time, they said, "Okay, let's just do it your way." And I actually would have people thank me when I took them in to get them booked in. Now, 2 people decided they was going to fight, instead of being arrested. Now, neither one of them got hurt. And I can't even tell you what I did for sure. But, it wound up being an outward parry or an inward parry going into a wrist lock. They're turned around backwards. I've got cuffs on them. And I got them in my patrol unit before they even knew that they'd been arrested. So luckily, nobody ever got hurt, including myself, which was my main priority, because I wanted to go home to my family every night. But again, most police officers out there don't know self-defense, and that's sad. And so, I had an officer tell me one time when I went through intermediate use of force, and he showed a video, and he said, "What did this officer do wrong?" And some people said something. He said he should immediately took that person to the ground and got him under control. And I said, "Yeah. And what do you think those 40, 50 people standing around his patrol unit watching all this would have done?" He goes, "Well, what do you mean by that?" And I said, "I personally think they'd probably kicked him or stomped the crap out of him." Well, I guess that could be a slight possibility. He showed 3 more videos, and on the third one, that's exactly what happened to the officer. I asked Mr. Parker one time, I said, what do you think about the Gracies? And he said, well, they're some of the best doing what they do that I've seen. He said, but why do you want to be on the ground? And I said, well, I don't. And he said, I don't either. And, out there wearing 40 pounds of gear as a police officer, the last thing I want to do is roll around on the ground with somebody trying to get them subdued. You can do most of that standing up with control manipulation, but you got to know how to do control manipulation to make that work. So anyway, enough preaching.
No, it's good. It's good. I like it. Yeah, there's the ground situation was definitely a wake up call to many martial arts, and the Gracies came on the scene and really changed people's thinking about fighting.
Yeah, it's a great art.
So,
but it's a great art, but it's a whole lot better when you're only dealing with one person.
Yeah.
And on the street, that's not necessarily how it's going to happen. They used to do that series Walker Texas Ranger, and he would fight 6 people, and then 5 of them would stand there till he beat the first guy up, and then another guy'd come in, he'd beat him up, and everybody stands there and waits on him to continually go through one person at a time, instead of doing what Jeff did in The Perfect Weapon, where he shows you can deal with more than one person at a time. So yeah, again, we need to have knowledge of all these arts that we can know, and to see how we can counter that in Kempo. And I had a gentleman come in who's very, very efficient at another art here 2 or 3 years ago, wanting to show me all his weapon techniques, and he couldn't make any of them work on me. And again, I was just using simple counters that we use in control manipulation and contact manipulations to defeat everything that he did. And he's going like, wow. And again, I wasn't trying to be arrogant, but again, because he asked me, he says, well, what would you do if I did this on you? And and he was, and most of the time he was trying to do the counters on me that they teach for self-defense. Couldn't make any of them work. So, but again, I want to know that it works in the studio, and before I try to find out if it works on the street. And that's one advantage I had not having an instructor, in my opinion, because my deal was I got to know this works for real. And so, and if it didn't, I started looking for some solutions to, make it work for me, but also make it work for any student that I've got. There was an instructor told a buddy of mine's female black belt here several years ago. She was trying to do something he was showing, and she said, I can't make this work. He said, well, that's because you're a girl. He said, Kempo was made for big guys. And she looked at him and she said, well, Mr. Burks could show me how to make it work. And again, that's my attitude. If it doesn't work for every size student that I got, and I think you probably remember, I've got 2 female students, and one of them's probably not 4'8", and her dad's 6'3.5", and I've seen her drop him to his knees numerous times, and which looking at the shocked look on his face. I don't think he ever thought that would be possible. But again, it is. It depends on what you learn and how you learn to do it. So.
Gotcha. I like it. Well, yes. Thank you so much for taking the time to sit down and tell me your story. And yeah.
Well, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for your service in the military and all the other veterans out there. Unfortunately, I didn't. They wouldn't take me in the military because I'd had what they thought was epilepsy when I was young, and they wouldn't let me go. All my brothers went. So my ideal of serving the public was going into law enforcement to compensate for that. So, but really appreciate all you veterans.
You did great work. So yeah, no, thank you. Once again, yeah, thank you for being on and sharing your story. And we'll definitely have to do this again. But I just thank you for taking the time, and I can't wait to get this out for the others that are listening to hear. And yeah, just thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
Okay. Thank you, my brother.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to My Empty Hands. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. If you didn't enjoy it, please share it with an enemy. If you'd like to be a guest, or if you would like to recommend a guest for the show, please email me at podcast@talkingkempo.com. Thank you.